My name is Julia Leef. I am a fiction graduate of the Leslie MFA June 2018 cohort, and the excerpt I'll be reading from today is from a short story that was part of my thesis, although it has changed a lot since then. This is from Recently Deceased Mother Gets Up to Make Breakfast, a story about a wife and mother of three who dies in the middle of the night, but gets up the next morning anyway to make her kids breakfast. Susan was determined that no one should notice her untimely demise. Malicious gossip and pitiful sympathy felt equally unwanted, and the last thing she needed was people speculating as to what kind of broken home had led to this outcome. Fortunately, Susan's foray into life as a living corpse went largely unnoticed over the following weeks. John had been unable to make out her panicked voicemail and told her to be more careful about pocket dialing him while he was at work. His early mornings and late evenings meant he hardly ever saw her in the daylight, and Rhonda didn't seem able to discern any changes over the phone. To her children, Susan may as well have turned into the Invisible Woman instead of the Walking Dead. They were happy enough to grab plates of snacks from her outstretched hands or leave their laundry baskets in the mudroom like sacrificial offerings, but whenever she held a movie or a board game in front of their faces, their eyes would glaze over, their fingers would busy themselves on their phones, and minutes later a friend would materialize to whisk them away. Susan assured herself that it was her condition which repulsed them, nothing more. Indeed, there were some visible differences. Susan took to parting her hair in a way that hid her deformed ear, her normally pale skin alternated between bruised shades of green and purple, and she felt uncomfortably bloated all the time. Most embarrassingly, she was frequently gassy, releasing foul bursts that clung to the air and shriveled the houseplants. Still, that her children should be so reluctant to spend time with her felt like a failure on her part. As a child, Susan had delighted in any opportunity to be with her father, who enjoyed teaching her how to play cards, and she could recall many a night spent losing goldfish crackers and M&Ms in blackjack and Texas Hold'em. Even after she had gotten the knack of strategic betting, occasionally gaining more than she had started out with, her father would mercilessly win it all back, only to split his loot with her 50-50. Susan treasured those moments, some of the few her father could spare for her. Perhaps that scarcity had been his secret. Her next post-mortem voyage outside the house came at the end of the month with John's company Halloween party. Part of an initiative to improve morale, it was more popular and well-attended than its December counterpart. Susan usually cajoled John into wearing couples costumes, though he still hadn't forgiven her for his coworkers calling him McDreamy for weeks after their Grey's Anatomy debut 2 years ago. This year, Susan hadn't pushed for any costumes, and John had fallen from the occasion by presenting her with a pair of fake vampire fangs, which kept dropping from her slackened jaw. Johnny was left in charge of his younger brothers, and Susan only hoped he would not get them into any trouble. "You look ghastly," Rhonda said when she saw her. She and George had come as Wilma and Fred Flintstone, a costume that made frequent appearances at this annual party, though on the Berwicks the effect was rather paradoxical. George stood a half-foot shorter than his wife, with a slim frame and the face to match. Rhonda was built around the shoulders in a way Susan thought quite attractive, but knew to be a source of insecurity for her friend. Rhonda's dark skin shone against the white of her dress, her natural curls leaking out from beneath the red wig. Last year, they had come as Torchy Brown and Dr. Paul Hammond, but everyone had thought they were the Jeffersons. John and George peeled off in search of their bar trivia buddies, leaving Rhonda and Susan to chat next to a crumpled decal of a witch colliding into the wall. "I almost didn't come tonight, I swear to God," Rhonda told her. "I am this close to missing my deadline, but George insisted." Rhonda glowered toward where George was chatting with a group of men near the drinks. John had already removed his fake teeth. "I swear, Susan, if I didn't need that corporate paycheck, I'd leave him." Rhonda worked as a comic strip artist for the local paper, a role she had inherited from her grandfather. Married Lives, which depicted the hardships and befuddlements of marriage, was often autobiographical. Susan would read her storyline mimicking one of her early morning phone calls with Rhonda, and wondered at the risk of it in such a small town where people couldn't help but talk. Rhonda's life was messy, and she didn't seem to care who knew it, and there was something about that which thrilled Susan. The editors at the newspaper loved Rhonda's take on the characters, although they had requested that her grandfather's name remain on the arc to preserve his legacy and to retain his readership. It paid well, but not enough to live independently. When it came to her husband, Rhonda was always making excuses. If the housing market wasn't in crisis, if my mother didn't love him so much, if he didn't cook dinner on the weekends. Susan knew she didn't mean a word of it. Everyone knew the Berwicks were very much in love. Susan caught the smile on Rhonda's face even as she continued to grumble. "That man is like a bad habit," she said, "but you know how it is." Susan didn't, and she burned with a desire for such a connection between them. Or maybe that was her stomach acid seeping through her intestines. Have you seen Jennifer Blakely? Rhonda asked, nodding across the room. Susan followed her gaze and saw the woman in question entertaining the CEO and his husband while dressed as Snow White, complete with tiny bluebirds sewn onto the shoulders of the dress. Her Prince Charming had exchanged his Uncle Sam costume for a cape and inappropriately tight leggings. I heard she made that outfit herself, Rhonda said. I'd say I'm surprised, but it is Jennifer. Of course, homemade costumes, charming personality, and fancy dinner parties were all one expected of a Jennifer. The group laughed at something the CEO's husband said, and Michael Blakely draped himself against his wife's shoulders, a hand sneaking around to stroke her belly. Do you think they're trying again? Rhonda whispered. God bless her, but no thank you. That is one thing George and I agree on, at least. Susan watched as Jennifer flattened her hand against her husband's, stilling his fingers, her lips pressed into a smile. Even in the face of their childlessness, they stood together as a united front, a team. Susan glanced over to where John was laughing with his work buddies. Was everyone wondering why they hadn't coordinated costumes this year? Why they had separated as soon as they had walked in the door? Rhonda had gotten back on George's case, but Susan barely listened. She was too busy watching Jennifer, the dead neurons in her brain stuttering to life as she began to plan. When George started performing Bruce Springsteen for his fellow inebriated coworkers, Rhonda stepped in to drag him away. She made sure to thank her husband's boss for a lovely evening and grasped Susan's shoulder on her way out. Susan could feel her flesh mash into pulp beneath Rhonda's fingers. The things we put up with, right, hon? She said. Susan waved goodbye and decided she had had enough as well, only doubling back when she remembered that John had the car keys. When they arrived home, they found Bobby moaning and clutching his stomach, a sizable pile of candy wrappers beside him, while Jason was watching a movie in the living room. Susan caught a glimpse of a blonde girl being choked by a phone cord while exposing her breasts to the camera. Johnny went out with Darren, Jason said, and sat on the remote when Susan tried to take it away. Lighten up, Mom, he said. This movie's not even that scary. I remember this scene, John said, sitting down beside Jason. When the VHS came out, we wore the tape down rewatching it. On screen, the girl slid to the floor, her killer looming over her in his emotionless mask. Over in the kitchen, Bobby unwrapped another piece of candy. Thank you very much.